Hello, welcome to my 2006 picture video. And this is our dredge that we used that year. We had an 8-inch Keene Mini, and we picked it up for a real good price. It had been sitting in storage for a few years. We took it down there and we just put it through the paces and made all kinds of adjustments and did all kinds of things to it and got it running real good. And we had a great year. So that was the first thing we did. We got the dredge and put together here in my backyard and made sure that all the parts were there. Then after that, we loaded it up in that nice red truck you see up there. We took it down to the river and we started going from there. So we had our birthdays at the same time we had vacation. And so this is my son's birthday party that he had down there with his buddies. And we would go down there swimming in the afternoons. We'd be dredging in the morning, early morning. Then we'd be dredging in the evening after everybody, you know, the public and all of our friends that were coming down during the day had left, so we wouldn't dirty up the water for them because that 8-inch dredge would really move a lot of material. And this is my birthday is on June 20th, his is on June 18th, and that's my dad in the center. We had a nice party, and he was there too, because it's just maybe 40 minutes from his house. And so here we are pulling one of the big rocks out of there. We don't have the boulder sling on there yet because this rock here was really being a pain, so we had to wrap the chain around it a bunch of times. What we did is we had a cable hooked up to a tree on a pulley, and it was hooked up to the back of my Suburban. And we would go ahead and we would just take that Suburban, and after we got everything set up, he would say pull, and I would, you know, pull that rock slow. But all the other rocks we were pulling with our boulder sling, we'd pull it fast, and you could see there we had the dredge out of the way, the rocks being pulled right there. You can still see the chain around it. And yeah, that was a nice pull. That was the beginning of the dam that we basically put there in 2006 with that dredge, because we moved so much material. And that's our boulder pile from 2005. All those boulders that you see there in front of you on the right and on the whole bottom edge, that string of boulders is all boulders that we put there ourselves. And this is a couple shots looking upstream from that swimming hole that we were just swimming in. And what we do, I just kind of panned around and took 2 shots at the dredge, then a couple shots down at the hole when my friends were down here swimming, just so you could see that we were just that close to the basically it's a public swimming area where everybody comes down and goes swimming and just enjoys life. So we didn't want to disturb them, and because we take care of them, this is some of our friends here, they would always come up and watch our equipment and watch our dredge, and we never had any problems, you know, than getting stolen back in the day, you know. I mean, we'd lose a few things here and there from people coming in. I think in let's see. Yeah, 2009, I lost a slingshot that I left out. It's like, whoa, well, such is life, you know, when you leave it out. And there's the dredge in operation. You can see it's not muddied up too bad, but that's one of the reasons we put the dam in there, was so it wouldn't muddy up the water. Yeah, that clay layer was about 3 feet thick, and if we hit that clay, it would just destroy the stream as far as it would just turn it brown. So what we would do is I had a bunch of floating lights that we would use at night, and we'd come in here at night, up till about, you know, midnight, between 8 o'clock at night and 10 o'clock, and we would dredge in complete and total darkness with our underwater lights on, and that way we wouldn't disturb anybody, and the, you know, the water wasn't hurting anybody. And it's just a picture of our camp here. And this is still on our big birthday party. We had the in-laws down here and us, and of course, the ex-wife wasn't there because she had serious bipolar disorder, and she was the star of the Introducing Bipolar Disorder to Spouses series that I did for everybody to help people understand the things that you have to deal with when you have a, you know, mental illness going on. And that was her parents, and she didn't even tell them that she had left for, probably a year and a half, I guess. I finally just broke down and told them myself because I got tired of waiting for her, and she got all mad and said it was none of my business to tell them that she was that left us, even though it had been almost a year later. So we had to pretend for that long that, you know, that she was around, and they kept saying, well, where's Carol? And we're like, well, you know, we don't know. She must be working, you know, and the fact was she'd been gone for a long time. You know, that's just how it goes when you're dealing with bipolar disorder, or, you know, in her case was a severe schizophrenia along with it. And, yeah, we went through hell that year. That's why we didn't get a whole lot of pictures, too, because we had stuff going on. It was just extremely insane, which is why I did the Introducing Bipolar Disorder for Spouses series. It's also on here, and then also the Advanced Child Protection series. If you know anybody that's, you know, a parent, any parent should watch the Advanced Child Protection series, because it teaches you what you really have to look for, you know, even in your own spouse, to make sure that, you know, your kids aren't going to be attacked by child predators. It's a good series, and I recommend it to everybody. And as far as bipolar disorder, you know, that's a way of life for a lot of people, and I go into explicit detail as far as everything it can do, and and the causes, what'll set you off, even the medications and stuff, and that's all in there. It's a really good series. But that's that series, and this is our gold mining series. So let's continue on with this. This is the only gold shot that I have in here, I think, until the very end of the movie, and this was just a few hours with the that 8-inch dredge. You know, just a single cleanup. I think it was our very first cleanup to see how it worked. And so we just put it up there against the side of the bank, you know, at night when we weren't going to be there for a week or whatever. You know, we had left it out in the middle like this when we were there. And look at the size of those hoses. They're like 10 inches around on the outside. It's 8-inch inside diameter. And that nozzle is really heavy, especially underwater. So what we did is I would put I think it was a T130 inner tube from a wheelbarrow tire, and I put a few of them on that hose, and we put just enough air in it to where it would float. There's a good shot of the 18-horse motors. It was a easily started right there from that one side. We had it set up so it would start from just standing right here on the one side, and you'd prime the one motor, and it would go ahead, and after you got it started, it would prime the other motor. Then you could turn the key on from right there. We had a switch right next to the other one, so you could just start it together without even having to move. And the choke and everything was all controlled from the same place. It was a real nice setup. And here's some of the gold that we got out here. I did a little panning ad for Frank down there at Pioneer to sell some of his brand new gold pans. And this is the Pioneer pan, which is still, as far as I'm concerned, is the best pan around, because you got the different riffles, and you know, it just works great. You just can't beat that Pioneer pan. Frank's out of business now. And this is a sluice box that I had ended up, we auctioned it off for money for a PLP that year. And here's our infamous boulder sling that we make. And I actually have a boulder sling video on here that tells you how to make these boulder slings. And it's a speed sling. Okay, and what I mean by speed sling is you just drop it over the boulder, because of its natural mushroom shape, it holds itself open. And you just drop it down, it goes around the rock, and you yell up the driver, pull. And this year, in 2006, we were using my Suburban to pull the rocks out of the way. So we would pull a rock, you know, every 2 to 3 minutes. As fast as I could pull with that truck, I would pull it up out of the way, because I found as soon as I got the feeling that it was in the net, and the net was tight, I would just give it the gas. It would actually lift that boulder up off the bottom and fly to where we wanted it. Then I would stop, and when I stopped fast enough, it would almost just roll right back out of this net, and he would just grab the net and go back and just drop it around the next one and say, pull again. It was just the best net. And you can see the other nets above that made by some of the other people in the industry, and they're all broken because they use the aluminum swages, where we used the copper swages on ours. Major difference with the copper swages, they don't break where the aluminum ones do. And this next picture just shows a picture of me, and you can see the Suburban there in the background, and I'm standing right in the spot where we actually has the cable goes across, and he would yell pull, and in between pulls, you know, when we were done for a while, I'd stand there and wait. And here you can see there is a basket full of boulders we're pulling downstream. It's actually just some cyclone fencing that we used. So we'd take the chain link fencing and lay it down there on the bottom and just stack a ton of cobbles in there, as much as you possibly could. Then I had a little cable that wrapped around the whole thing, and it just pulled it tight. And when we pulled the cobbles up out of there, we would do that. Then we would drop the hooks off the bottom and just pull a little bit farther, and it would pull a chain link fencing right out from underneath it, or actually just over the top of the rocks and out, and we'd just take it back up there for the small rocks. But the boulder sling worked really, really good as far as getting all the other boulders out of there, and we pulled so many boulders so fast with the boulder sling that we started making them and using only those boulder slings from there on in, because the store-bought ones that we were getting, they would just constantly break, and they were just a pain, and you had to actually fit them over each rock and then hold them in place, and then you couldn't safely get out of the way a lot of times. And it was just, you know, if you've used regular boulder slings, then you know it's just not the easiest. And here we are, you know, breaking down for the night. All we would do is we'd take the hose and we'd set it up on the shore each night and leave the dredge sitting right there while we were here on vacation that week. But look at the size of the hose compared to the two guys there bringing it out of the water. That was a big hose. We moved a lot of material and we got a lot of gold out of there. I got some underwater pictures coming up here too in a little bit. And yeah, this is just one of my favorite shots, is these guys, you know, getting it all set up. And, you know, starting this dredge was a breeze. Like I said, it had the electric start on it. All you had to do was turn the key, and we were in business every single day. And here's a cleanup we did, and there's all kinds of gold in that box, and Jim, he's just happier than hell, and sitting there on the side. And you know, that was one thing that was really nice about this dredge that, you know, I would recommend to anybody else is, you know, build the dredge you can stand on, you know. And the kids just had a blast diving off it into the hole, because we had the hole was eventually around 15 feet deep. So, you know, the kids would come up there and they'd dive off the dredge and just have a good time. Another shot of us sitting here at the end of the day. You know, I just took a few shots here and there because, you know, we didn't do a whole lot of shooting because, like I said, oh, here's another shot of the cobble bag, the chain link fence cobble bag. And so that's all we would do, is just roll them right on down, stream out of the way, and unhook. We had two little carabiners on there. We just unhooked the carabiners that we had, you know, around the outside that formed the basket itself, and we would just drag the rocks out. I mean, we'd drag the cyclone fencing just over the top. It would just come right out, and it was just, you know, the greatest setup. Then I went down for a day and saw my buddy Bluebeard, and I dredged with him with his 6-inch. That was actually Wally Cos's old dredge that I had built and rebuilt for Wally, and we got it working really good. Then Rick had bought it from me, you know, out of the estate basically, and we took it down there and went dredging and had a good time. The old Wally, he really liked his flotation. You can look at that dredge. It had 4 sets of floats on each side, and boy, I'll tell you, that sucker was way out of the water. You didn't have to worry about sinking that dredge. It would take an army to make that dredge go under. And there was Rick right there with the winch that he was using down there that year. Yeah, he's good people, one of my friends, and this was one of the friends he had down there with him. And she was taking a lot of the pictures for us and stuff. I don't have a lot of them here. But, oh, here we are back at the Yuba again, and you can see the 4-inch sitting there. That's a 4-inch pro line. That was Jim's pro line. He just wanted to bring it up because he hadn't used it in so long that he had to try it out. So we put the 4-inch down there for the year also, and we were using this 4-inch with my box, the over-under box, to you know, get all the fine gold back up out of the tailings of the 8-inch. Oh, here we are at the underwater shots now. And look at the size of that nozzle compared to Abe. I mean, but you can see that T130 ring right there behind the nozzle, and so he could hold it up, you know, easily with 2 hands. I could hold it up easily with 1 hand. It would just actually almost float. We put just enough air in there to where it wouldn't allow the nozzle to just float away or float up and get air. It was still on the bottom, but you could lift it easily with just 1 hand like it was nothing. And it worked out really good. See, they had the 2 inner tubes on it right there. And there I am working down at the bottom. See how fast I hit that clay layer? And as soon as you hit that clay layer, immediately it would do that. It would just start clouding up. So we'd have to keep that stuff really clean. That's why we ended up working at night, because we didn't want to mess it up for everybody else that was coming down there all the time. And there's Abraham one-handing it, and he's doing really good moving it out of the way. And then I'm on the left in this shot. And you can see how good those little inner tubes work. You don't put a whole lot of air in there, just enough to where it keeps the hose just buoyant, and just enough to where you got that nozzle, you know, to where it's light enough to move around with 1 hand, you know. You can move it anywhere easily. And here we are just taking it down. You could see the little bit of the clay forming, so we pulled it up out of there. And we had a whole bunch of underwater shots. And like I was saying, I got this bank of underwater lights. They're actually headlights mounted in styrofoam. And we had a little set of homemade pontoon set up with some blue 15-gallon drums that I use. Actually, it's the same drums I use to make my 6-inch. And then we would float those lights on there at night with the batteries, and it would attract like every fish in the river. And it was literally so thick that you were pushing through the fish at night to get out of that hole. And it was so dark, if you stuck your head up out of the hole, you couldn't see your hand in front of the face, but you could look forward ahead of you and see the lights at the head of the dredge. It was just simply amazing, simply amazing. And as soon as you go back down, and you know, if you're gassing up the dredge or whatever, you would be literally having to gently push the fish out of the way and push through them because they were that thick. They were so thick and so scared on the end of that dredge that when they saw you coming, they couldn't even move. They were literally packed in like sardines. And this is why we ran at night, was because when we hit this clay layer, it would just turn that river a chocolate brown. And so, you know, we would do our best to stay out of that during the day. And it was really neat because at night there was nobody there. So we'd take the fire hose down there underwater and just open it up full blast and just mix all that clay up and get all the gold out of it. All the gold would just go to the bottom. The clay would just come up into the, you know, into the water itself, and we would let it just suck itself through that 8-inch nozzle and down and out. And that's really about all the dirt we would get, because as long as we kept the fire hose down below it, the gold would drop out of the clay to the bottom of the hole, and we would keep the 8-inch nozzle probably 4 feet above the hole. Well, we really couldn't see what we were doing because it was dark, and with the amount of clay down there, just turned it brown. And we went through a lot of material at night. We would probably run, you know, 4 hours at night, each night after dark, so that it wouldn't muddy it up for anybody else that was downstream. And here's a nice boulder we were pulling. I think this is the same one that we used the chains on in the beginning of the video. I'm not 100% sure. Oh no, that's our boulder sling. So you can see how the boulder sling just fits right around the rocks. And he would say pull, and I would go as fast as I could, you know, which was maybe up to 20 miles an hour, because I knew I had this exact spot marked at the end of the cable to where I had to stop to drop it in the right spot each time. And this is after a good number of pulls here, but that you can see how that sling just wraps itself right around the boulders every time. And I just threw this shot in here. We got some kind of a weird, you know, lighting shot on this, and it was just an interesting shot, so I use this as my wallpaper every now and again. I just love this photo, the way it turned all red. And that's Abraham and Jim down there doing some dredging, and I'm taking the pictures. And old Jim, he was pretty flashy. You know, he had that that tank pad there on his back that he had his air mounted to from his scuba tank set up. And yeah, it was kind of heavy. It had a little bit of weight to it, and then he ended up getting rid of that, you know, a couple years later. But, you know, for a long time, that was his basic setup, and part of it because he was so used to wearing tanks from going scuba diving all the time. And these are just going to be, you know, underwater videos, just various you can watch, and you can see the size of the hose compared to those guys, you know, and it just sets down there. And look at the size of the rocks that we're having to move, and just how many. So when we're out there pulling, we would run for about 4 hours, and we would pull for about a day. And yeah, they're giving us the thumbs ups and a big hello in this picture. And because there were so many cobbles and so many rocks, you just couldn't get out of there. We were just going straight down. We weren't doing the perfect hole where you go in at a real slight angle. We went down at, you know, as steep as angle as it was safe. We pulled the rocks out of there just so fast with that boulder sling. It was just ridiculous. We moved tons and tons and tons of rock that year. Actually, these pictures here that you're seeing now, they're taken at the end of the year. This is our last trip down at the in the end of October. That's one thing about this place down here where we're at. You can dredge year round, but we were usually out of there by the first or second week of October anyway, because the water just starts getting cold enough to where we just didn't feel the need to be down there in the water. So, you know, even though we have year-round dredging where we're at there on the Yuba River, we don't use it, you know. And there he is in action. You know, sometimes he'd straddle it and run it like that, and other times he'd, you know, use it one-handed like I would do mostly. I would have the hose coming around on over my knee, and I'd use one hand on that, and then I'd have the fire hose in my hand like Abraham is. That's all that is. It's a regular a hard line off of a fire truck. We just have our own nozzle set up on there. Yeah, that's one thing when you're dredging, you know, is if you got a nice fire hose, and I'm not talking about a little tiny garden hose, okay? You use a nice fire hose, you can duct tape it or even clamp it to the end of your nozzle, and as long as you have it turned on all the time, it's breaking up all that material before it goes into the dredge. You know, and you're moving a lot more material that way. It's enough material to where you actually got to hold the nozzle back to keep it from going up, from so much going up to where you're going to start losing gold, because you want to have a certain amount of material going up, you know, so it keeps the dredge flowing evenly with cobbles and rocks going out over the back. You don't want to just have, you know, start and stop and pause and this and that. So we always usually had at least one fire hose hooked to the nozzle at all times, you know, or a garden hose. You know, on the 6-inch we use a garden hose that is clamped to the nozzle full time and on all the time. And then we have a fire hose on its own pump that we use for, you know, breaking up the material in front of the dredge nozzle. And that's how we move so much material so fast, and you get more gold that way, because the more material you can move out of the way, the more gold you're going to get. And you can see up there in the upper left-hand corner those nasty-looking orange pontoons that Jim had to get, because they were the only color they had left. Oh, and here's yours truly. I was down there trying to get another shot with the air in one hand and my mask in the other, you know. And there you can see how I'm working it, you know, just pretty much. Do I even have a hand on the nozzle? It doesn't look like I even have a hand on the nozzle at that time. I just go ahead and I'd put the nozzle where I needed it, and the material would just flow into it, and I would just be using both hands to pull the rocks out from in front of the nozzle before they got sucked into it, and it just really, really moved the material so well. Yeah, 2006. You know, with that 8-inch dredge, that was a fun year, and that one thing I'll never forget is all those fish that you actually had to push through, and they were just looking at you freaking out because they couldn't get out of the way because there was so many of them packed together. You know, it was just ridiculous. And look at that, one-handed with those two little floats on there. I could move that dredge nozzle anywhere underwater. I think the nozzle weighs, what, 40 to 60 pounds dead weight out of the water. So, yeah, we're coming up towards the end of the video. We're going to have a couple 4-inch shots in here with Jim doing the 4-inch. And I got a little tiny gold piece at the end. And you know what? We just had one heck of a year in 2006. We didn't get a whole lot of mining done because I was working all the time and I was becoming a single parent. But it was still a good year, you know, even though I became a single parent. I guess, was I a single parent? Well, I became an only parent because, you know, that's all gone through in the Introduction to Bipolar Disorder series. When I was told by a psychiatrist she would leave exactly that year in 1984, 20 years earlier almost. He told me she would leave, you know, in 2006. And I was like, yeah, whatever. When I was 25 years old, I thought he was lying. And so anyway, yeah, that was my 2006 year. It was just one heck of a year for us as far as the family goes. We became, you know, basically the independent operator. Even at home, I'd been that way for a long time. And hey, there's Jim with his little 4-inch there. But I'll tell you what, with that 4-inch with the over-under box, you just can't beat it for the fines recovery. You know, and I have on the 49er Mike website, you can go into the how-to section and it'll show you how to build an over-under box for your Proline dredge or any dredge. And it's a good article. And maybe one of these days I'll get a chance to put a video together on it too when we're using it, as we still use it today as a boomer box. And here's a picture of some of the gold we got in the vial. The gold that's not in the vial, of course, did not come from there. And you know, you saw my 16-to-1 mining video. That big old nugget there on the left was came out of one of the Dutch flat hydraulic mines back in the 1800s. Hey, and that's all the time we got. You guys have a good one.